On June 15th, 1905, in the waters off Wollall in Western Australia, a diver fished a shell from the sea floor. He climbed aboard the small pearl tender Cleopatra and handed the shell to the ship's tender, who pried it open to reveal a huge, beautiful round pearl, the finest that the crew had ever discovered. A pearl of that quality and size would yield a fortune. The crew of other nearby boats came aboard to look at the prize, and the men celebrated late into the night. But when they woke up the next morning, the pearl was gone. It had been stolen by another diver who hatched a scheme to sell it to a man who bought and sold stolen pearls. They arranged to meet him on a wrecked schooner called the Mist. But instead of selling the valuable pearl, they would give the man a fake. The experienced buyer immediately realized the deception. As the deal went south, the conspirators hit the man over the head and sent him tumbling into the sea below, where he soon drowned. It was a sloppy crime. The body soon washed ashore, and those responsible were put on trial and sentenced to death. But the whereabouts of the pearl remained a mystery. Legend had it that the valuable treasure was wedged into the planking of the wrecked Mist, only to be retrieved years later. What became known as the Roseate Pearl changed hands a number of times. Each owner would meet an untimely end. Heart attacks, murder. One man even took his own life. Eventually, the cursed pearl landed in the hands of a wealthy pearl dealer, Abraham Davall Davis, who purchased it for 12,000 Australian pounds, a fortune at the time. On March 20th, 1912, he boarded the passenger liner SS Koombana on a voyage from Port Hedland to Broome. The liner would soon be engulfed by a major cyclone. The Koombana and her 156 passengers and crew were never seen again. Before we get too deep into things, I want to take a quick second to talk about the sponsor of today's video, Incogni. The Adelaide Steamship Company had a contract for the Koombana with the Australian government to carry mail between northwest ports. In those days, letters and messages could take weeks or even months to arrive. Today, things move a lot faster. It's never been harder to stay private and keep your data secure. That's where Incogni can help. There are hundreds of data brokers that aggregate your personal information, potentially including your name, login credentials, location history, online activity, even things like your date of birth, social security number, and other sensitive details. Once they get that information, they sell it to the highest bidder. With one simple sign-up, Incogni will contact data brokers on your behalf and request that they remove your personal information. They handle the whole removal process for you. And with Incogni's custom removal feature, if you find a site with your information, just copy the link and send it to Incogni. They're the experts at removing data that shouldn't be available. And it's not just a one-time thing. They will continue to monitor these data brokers to make sure your data stays off the market and remove it whenever it pops up. This helps cut down on all that annoying spam and add some protection in an unpredictable world. Use code OLDBOATS at the link below to get 60% off an annual plan. That's incogni.com/oldboats. Incogni also offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk in trying it out. By 1906, the Adelaide Steamship Company recognized that the northwest coast of Western Australia had a bright future. 3 industries were flourishing, bringing wealth and promise to the region. In Broome, the pearling industry thrived. Between 1902 and 1906, the port city's fleet of pearl luggers grew from 220 to 350 boats, contributing an export revenue of £200,000 a year. The industry was rife with crime, racial exploitation, and corruption. But there were fortunes to be made, so naturally, people came flocking. Wool had shown similar promise. While the north of Australia had only produced a fraction of the 2 million bales produced across Australia and New Zealand in the 1905-1906 season, nearly every wool producer across the vast region saw growing success. The considerable distance from the more established wool operations in the south meant that the shearing season could extend longer into the year without any overlap. By 1906, it looked as though northern wool could even eclipse the profits generated by Broom's pearls. But the industry that showed the greatest potential was beef cattle. It had only been 20 years since the first herds were driven west across the great savanna grasslands of Kimberley. The cattle thrived, and in the years since, the industry only flourished. As these three industries grew exponentially, it seemed that the only thing holding Australia's remote west coast back was a lack of infrastructure and reliable transportation. Since 1900, the Adelaide Steamship Company serviced the region with the modest 1,725-ton SS Koombana. But the aging second-hand ship was slow, small, and utilitarian, hardly the reflection of the growth and prosperity that the region demanded. It was clear to the company that a steamer designed specifically for the region would be a clear winner. The new ship would need to serve several purposes. She would need large holds that could carry general goods, live cattle, and refrigerated cargo. Equal attention would be paid to her passenger spaces. While the towns she would service appeared rough, fortunes were being made, and plenty of wealthy travelers were moving in and looking for a reliable connection to the south. The new ship would need accommodations that could rival the finest liners afloat at the time. Clean, comfortable, luxurious passenger spaces could fetch higher fares and elbow out any potential rivals. On December 7, 1906, the Adelaide Steamship Company was advised that their contract with the Australian government to carry mail in the northwest would be renewed for another 3 years. While the agreement only guaranteed £4,000 a year, it was steady revenue, and being a mail carrier was a valuable marketing tool that could be used to show the company's status and reliability. By March 25, 1907, the company began seriously planning the new ocean liner that would serve the route between Fremantle and various ports in the northwest coast of Australia. On November 29, 1907, Alexander Stevens and Sons in Lindhouse, Scotland was commissioned to build a new ship for £92,500. Labeled Yard Number 429, Scottish workers began piecing together the impressive hull. She would easily be the largest ship dedicated to Australia's northwest coast, and by far one of the most technologically advanced and well-appointed. A reflection of the optimism and promise that characterized the Edwardian era, and created some of the greatest marvels ever put to sea. Yard Number 429 was launched on October 27, 1908. She was christened by Mrs. S. Elgar, the wife of one of the Adelaide Steamship Company's superintendents in Britain. It was tradition for the company to use local Aboriginal names for their ships. Yard Number 429 would be named Koombana, the Noongar name for a bay near Bunbury. The word Koombana is believed to mean either spouting whales or calm and peaceful. After a successful launch, work began on fitting out the new ship. Captain John Rees, former master of the Boolarra, sailed for England on the Royal Mail steamer Orontes to oversee the ship's construction. Work moved quickly. The results exceeded every expectation. The Koombana measured 340.1 feet or 103.7 meters in length, with a beam of 48.2 feet or 14.7 meters. She came in at 3,668 gross registered tons. Steam was generated by Babcock and Wilcox water tube boilers that fed a 3-cylinder triple expansion engine, driving a single propeller. She could achieve a top speed of 14 knots, though her average speed would be around 13. She could carry 90 passengers in first class and 130 in second. She would not have a steerage or third class. Instead, she was equipped with vast cargo spaces that could carry 4,000 tons of general cargo and 800 tons of refrigerated cold storage. Movable stalls on her main deck could accommodate up to 200 heads of cattle. Her lavish passenger accommodation spanned 3 decks. Some even claim that she was as finely appointed as the Titanic, though that's probably a bit of an exaggeration. She featured a drawing room with rich satinwood paneling and purple upholstered lounges. The room had a full library of newly released books, 2 Chippendale-style writing desks, and a grand piano. Her main entrance and grand stairway were paneled in mahogany, and her smoking room offered a cozy warmth with scarlet upholstered furnishings. Her main dining room featured oak paneling, green upholstered seating, and could accommodate up to 75 people. The entire ship was designed with the hot Australian climate in mind. Public spaces were well ventilated, and every single cabin was fitted with an electric fan, a great luxury in the days before air conditioning. Koombana's bridge was equipped with nearly all the modern safety equipment available at the time. While she was not initially equipped with a wireless Marconi set, one was installed on the ship in 1911 during her 3rd annual refit. In addition to her lifeboats, she was also equipped with a motor launch to help access the underdeveloped ports that she would service. These ports presented another unique design challenge. Koombana would by far be the largest ship to call at most of these harbors, many of which had minimal infrastructure and almost no dredging. The only comparable ship in the Adelaide Steamship Company's fleet was the SS Koombana. Dedicated to the more established ports in the south, Koombana's 24-foot or 7.3-meter draft would not be able to access almost any of the ports in the north. Koombana would need to be shallower while maintaining her size. After considerable analysis and deliberation, her draft was reduced to just 20.8 feet or 6.3 meters. By December 1909, Koombana easily passed her sea trials. She was soon ready for the long delivery voyage to her new home in Australia, a voyage that would demonstrate her promise and give an ominous warning for her ill-fated future. A heavy snowstorm swept over Scotland when the Koombana departed Glasgow for her delivery voyage on December 30th, 1908. The trip included calls at several ports and would utilize the liner's full potential, carrying several passengers, cargo, horses, lambs, and a ram. Before leaving Glasgow, a strange incident occurred on board. A passenger named Edwin Couch was found dead in his cabin from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. The tragedy was kept quiet, and the Koombana departed as planned. At her second port in Greenock, the liner was delayed while she waited for passengers that had been stranded by the storm. But finally, on the 31st, she collected the last of her intended passengers and began her voyage south. After stops in the Canary Islands, she crossed the equator on January 13th, 1909, and arrived in Cape Town on the 23rd, and then continued on to Durban, where she arrived on the 27th. For numerous passengers, South Africa was their destination. Several would disembark. Taking their place was a large group that would take the ship to Australia. Throughout the voyage, Koombana performed exceptionally, greatly impressing Captain Rees. The general mood among passengers was equally positive. The ship was stable and well appointed, the voyage calm, and comfortable. It was exciting to be the first to enjoy a brand new ship at the outlet of what promised to be a long and triumphant career. But one passenger didn't share the excitement. At Durban, a man named J.H. Taylor joined the ship. From the moment he set foot on board, his mood seemed off. His fellow passengers described him as behaving, quote, in a peculiar and eccentric manner. At dinner, he told his table mates that his time in South Africa had been a profound disappointment, and that he had lost a considerable sum of money. His dour mood was a stark contrast with the hope and optimism of his fellow passengers. On the morning of January 30th, 2 days after the Koombana left Durban, the steward assigned to Mr. Taylor found his cabin empty. The ship was searched top to bottom, but the man was never found. After several passengers confirmed his melancholic mood, it was assumed that he leapt from the ship sometime in the night. It was an unsettling turn of events, but it was quickly forgotten, overshadowed by the enthusiasm for the liner. Koombana arrived in Fremantle on February 11th. She soon sailed to Adelaide and finally to Melbourne, where she was dry docked for 2 days for inspections and minor adjustments. By March 12th, she had returned to Fremantle, ready to begin her intended voyages along the northwest coast. But her career would get off to a rough start. Her first proper northwest voyage departed Fremantle on March 12, 1909. By March 15th, the Koombana had completed her call in Geraldton and was making her way to Carnarvon, where she was expected to arrive by that evening. The weather was less than ideal, and low visibility made it difficult for Captain Rees to determine his exact position. While sailing at full speed approximately 14 miles from Denham in Shark Bay, Captain Rees mistook a buoy marking a sandbar for a channel marker, and soon grounded his ship. Koombana was designed for shallow ports, and it was more or less expected that the ship would occasionally strike bottom. Captain Rees expected that she would easily be refloated. Her ballast tanks were completely emptied, but the ship remained stuck. Over the next 10 days, after great effort including offloading her cargo and a failed tow attempt, the liner finally lifted free from the sandbar. The ship seemed undamaged, and she continued on her voyage, making record time on the leg from Carnarvon to Onslow. Despite the ordeal, the ship received rave reviews and acclaim. Groundings would become a regular issue for the Koombana. On 2 subsequent voyages, the ship struck bottom. Neither incident interrupted her schedule, and only very minor damage was found when she was inspected at port. But on her next voyage, water was discovered leaking into one of her tanks, suggesting that she might have sustained more damage than initially thought. She was sent to Sydney for dry docking in July. This revealed a massive 70-foot gash along her hull and a split several feet long near her keel. She had remained afloat only thanks to her double bottom and ballast tanks. 13 hull plates were replaced, and the ship was soon returned to service. The incident only seemed to prove the strength and dependability of the Koombana. She remained a local favorite, and bookings continued to flow in. Over the next few years, the Koombana settled into a familiar routine. She occasionally grounded, but these issues became less frequent as Captain Rees became more familiar with the ship and the difficult ports she frequented. There were 2 fires on board in her cargo holds, but both were contained and caused minimal damage. In April 1911, she was hit by another ship in Victoria Key. The accident was attributed to the other ship and caused minimal damage to the Koombana. In September 1911, Captain Rees was transferred to the SS Winfield. He was replaced by Captain Thomas Maurice Allen. Tom Allen Jr. was born in Port Adelaide in December 1859. His father, also named Thomas Allen, was a sea captain, and his family frequently traveled with him so much so that Tom Allen's two younger siblings were both born at sea. He joined his first ship as an able-bodied seaman immediately after he finished grammar school. He quickly rose through the ranks and took command of his first ship, an old bark called the Verulam, in August 1884, when a regular captain fell ill. While the charge was brief, he would go on to command a number of ships in the coming years. Why exactly he traded ships with Captain Reese is a mystery lost to time. Reese had been with the Koombana since the early days of her construction. The Winfield, an old run-of-the-mill cargo ship, was a considerable downgrade. But for Captain Allen, a ship as prestigious as Koombana was a great opportunity to advance his career. But he knew that the liner would be a challenge. Operating the Koombana was a constant balancing act. Her schedule was not dictated by passenger demand or connecting sea and rail services. Instead, it was solely dependent on the tides, which had to be just right for the ship to safely navigate her ports of call. More than once, she became stranded in port for days after missing a tidal window. Sandbars were always shifting, and often Koombana could only traverse certain areas when her ballast tanks were completely empty. But her shallow draft created another problem. When fully ballasted down, the ship handled exceedingly well. But when her ballast tanks were empty, leaving the ship riding as high in the water as possible, she became difficult and unwieldy. On February 8, 1910, while still under the command of Captain Reese, the ship heeled hard over during a squall and took several minutes to right herself. As Captain Allen became more acquainted with the eccentricities of the ship and the northwest coast, he became increasingly concerned about how she would handle in a storm. Perhaps Captain Reese gave up his command because he grew exhausted with the tedious ballet of ballasting and balancing through the tides. Despite these concerns, no one seemed to believe that the ship was actually unsafe. To the contrary, throughout her short career, the Koombana was seen as a fine and able ship, more capable than most any other vessel that served the area. Despite her demanding schedule, Captain Allen had managed to avoid sailing through any major storm. By March 1912, he believed that the worst of the cyclone season was behind them. Unfortunately, he would prove to be wrong. March 1912 brought a heat wave to the northwest coast of Australia. By Wednesday the 20th, Koombana was in Port Hedland, tied up at the jetty alongside the Bellara. Initially replaced by Koombana, Bellara had been brought back into service as Koombana alone couldn't keep up with the rising passenger and cargo demand. Bellara had been scheduled to depart the day before, but a delayed shipment of cattle caused her to miss the tide. She would now depart directly after Koombana. For 3 days, barometers on the two ships had steadily fallen. No one could quite make out what the weather would bring. The fall was gradual, not sharp enough to clearly indicate an approaching storm. The night before brought strong winds, but by morning things had settled down, and now the sea state was calm. Experienced locals were more sure. Old-time pearl divers returned to port warning of a change in the water. Their pearling luggers were moved up the mangrove creeks, and people went to work bolting up their homes to prepare for a storm. But it wouldn't be the first time that locals prepared for bad weather that never materialized. The uncertainty over what the weather would bring made Captain Allen anxious. The voyage between Port Hedland and Broome was short, only about 24 hours. If he timed it right, the tides would line up perfectly, allowing easy access to the harbor in Broome. Even if the weather took a turn, it probably wouldn't get bad until Koombana was far out to sea, a better place to face a storm than near the shallow coastline. But he knew that it was risky. A mad dash out of port risked grounding. The ship had to be as light as possible, and her ballast tanks were completely emptied the night before. But to ride through a storm, the ship would need to be ballasted down. But remaining in port would bring its own challenges. The harbor at Port Hedland was a largely undeveloped tidal estuary, with nothing but a jetty that stretched out into a deep pool. There was virtually no protection from a storm, and it was almost certain that if things went south, the Koombana could be ripped from her moorings and driven into the nearby mangroves. Staying in port could be even more dangerous than making a run for it. After a long deliberation with Captain Upjohn of the Bollara, Captain Allen seemed to make up his mind. He was going out. He would have to depart quickly, sail straight out to sea, and ballast down as quickly as possible. Whether or not he believed a storm was imminent is unclear, but he was already behind schedule, and his options were limited. At 10:20 that morning, the tide reached its peak, giving Koombana just enough depth to safely leave Port Hedland. She pulled away from the jetty and raced for the open sea. The Bollara followed around 20 minutes later. Typically, northbound ships would fade from view within 30 to 45 minutes. But as the storm rolled in, witnesses watched the ship roll and pitch in the building seas for nearly 2 hours before she finally vanished into the cyclone. Captain Upjohn of the Bollara watched his fellow ship struggle forward as the storm exploded overhead, unleashing a torrent of wind, rain, and massive swells. Soon, the two ships became separated as the storm ripped away at the Bollara. She sustained major damage, and her funnel was ripped away, but after a mighty struggle, she reached the safety of Cossack. Captain Upjohn believed that his ship sailed directly through the eye of the cyclone. He would soon find out that he was the last person to ever see the SS Koombana. The 74 crew members and 82 passengers on board SS Koombana on March 20th, 1912, came from all walks of life. Some of the crew had been with the Koombana for years. Others were new to the ship. At least 2 crew members felt lucky to have been transferred off the passenger ship Yongala the previous year, right before she was lost with all hands. Among the Koombana's passengers were cattlemen and harbor masters, wives and families, young men looking for a new start, and women traveling for the season. 10 passengers came from the pearl trade. Whether the fabled roseate pearl was on board is unknown. While it's a good story, the cursed pearl's whereabouts after it was stolen are based more on legend than on fact. Many of the people on board were well-known fixtures of their communities. Their stories are well documented. Others, both crew and passengers, are nothing more today than a name in a ledger. Who they were, where they came from, all of those details have been lost to time. As of the making of this video, the Koombana has never been found. After she failed to arrive in Broome, a search was organized. On April 2nd, 1912, the ship sailed through a scattered debris field, around 25 miles north of Bedou Island, some 62 miles offshore. A stateroom door was recovered, along with paneling from her promenade deck and a few planks from one of her lifeboats. Eventually, an air tank from the ship washed ashore. That was all that was ever found. While it's clear that the Koombana was lost in a storm, how such a capable ship was overtaken while smaller, older ships managed to survive is a mystery. A court of marine inquiry was established to investigate the tragedy 1 month later. They found that the liner had been in excellent trim, with her propeller well submerged when she left Port Hedland. Her stability was tested with her known complement of cargo and crew, as well as numerous other variations. No matter what conditions were simulated, the Koombana's stability was found to be perfectly satisfactory. Witnesses all confirmed these findings. Every person interviewed testified that the ship had excellent seagoing qualities, and affirmed the skill and temperament of her captain and officers. There was nothing in her building or inspection records that suggested that the Koombana was anything but a capable and sturdy ship. The court found no explanation for the sinking. They concluded their report by saying that, quote, "Her fate passes beyond human knowledge and remains a mystery of the sea." But there are many anecdotes that could contradict these findings. Many newspapers and writings at the time from people familiar with the Koombana and her crew mentioned that the ship felt top-heavy and was prone to developing a list, even when tied up in port. These stability issues, paired with the empty ballast tanks required to clear Port Hedland, might have made her vulnerable to capsizing in heavy seas. Some even called for a second inquiry to better assess these accusations, but nothing became of the requests. Immediately following the loss, the Adelaide Steamship Company assigned the Alina to the Koombana's former route, but quickly withdrew the ship in 1913 after the formation of the government-owned State Shipping Service of Western Australia, which operated passenger services in the area until 1973. In the decades since Koombana's loss, numerous attempts have been made to locate her wreck. She continues to be one of the most sought-after shipwrecks in Australia. Despite in-depth analysis of her route and potential resting places, no trace of the liner has ever been found. She remains a relic of a past that grows more distant with each passing year. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this one, support the channel with a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you again to Incogni for sponsoring this video. Check them out using the link below. I'd like to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon and my channel members. Their support helps keep the channel afloat. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Until the next one, be nice to people.